Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 6, 2015, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Gibson, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Majority Leader.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And this evening, I'll be joined with 3 other veterans. And among the 4 of us, 3 Airborne Ranger qualified veterans and 1 Navy SEAL. And we will be talking about our freedoms and this exceptional way of life. Madam Speaker, earlier this year, on the 4th of July, we celebrated 240 years of our independence, celebrating our freedoms. And earlier this week, in a series of somber memorials, I was in some of my towns across the 11 counties of the 19th Congressional District of New York, and we marked the 15th year since the 11th of September of 2001. And Madam Speaker, it's often been the case in the human experience that in adversity, character is revealed. I would submit that the character of the American soul was revealed on that day. Courage in the face of danger. At World Trade Center, when so many Americans were working their way down the stairs, our first responders were on their way up to make sure that no one was left behind. Remarkable courage in the face of danger. And I think about, what it must have been like on United Airlines 93, when they had that revelation that the country was under attack and that their plane, which had been hijacked, was destined for some target, likely in the national capital region, and how they summoned up the courage to attack. Ordinary Americans doing extraordinary things. Courage in the face of danger. Part of the American soul, part of our character. Also, I would add, unity. Unity of our country. Often, very often, we celebrate the diversity in this country. And in fact, we're very proud of the fact that we have freedom of thought, freedom of expression, and we celebrate that diversity. But, Madam Speaker, we also, at the same time, honor our unity. And that was clearly on display on the 11th of September and all the days after. And then finally, what I would add, courage in the face of danger, unity, love and support. I saw that firsthand again this week throughout my district in these memorials. It certainly was the case on the 11th of September. And I think when you think about what it means to be an American and the freedoms that we hold dear, this is a way of life worth defending. And that's why I'm excited to be with my colleagues here this evening to talk about that. Because, oftentimes we don't think about this. It's no less true. What we did in the 18th century was truly radical. We changed the trajectory of history with our revolution. You think about those summoning words in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. We have a tendency to look back on that and say, well, of course, that was utterly radical. This was the era, the 18th century, that was the era of the divine right of kings and queens and aristocracies. The heads of state of Europe, they gave us no chance. They never thought this would work. They scoffed at us. They believed that ultimately chaos would unfold and that we would beg for the monarchy to come back. And Madam Speaker, we showed the world, a humble nation, mostly farmers at the time, and we showed the world that we could not only survive, that we could thrive and flourish and really go on to be, as many have said, the greatest hope for mankind. And Madam Speaker, that's why we're here tonight. We all believe passionately in this. We took an oath that said we were ready to give our life for that. And we're still fighting for that now as we serve in the United States Congress. And if you look at, when we consider the kind of government that we brought forward, this was a government of the people, by the people, for the people, a self-governing people. Philosophers had written about it. We had some forms of that in republics over the centuries. But really, what many had theorized, we were really the first to put in full practice. And here I'm talking explicitly about an independent judiciary. Heretofore, they had been, extensions of the crown, extensions of the executive branch. And James Madison and many of the other founders came forward, and they said, and this was what was so revolutionary, is we're going to put the individual at the center, the citizen at the center. Before that time, government really was, it was the state. It was the king. It was the queen. And we said we're going to be self-governing. And, Madam Speaker, to do that, we brought forward a constitution. And that was, again, what was really, I think, at the end, pivotal, because we had a contemporary. And that, less than a decade later, France had a revolution. But unfortunately, ultimately, they begged for the monarchy to come back. Their revolution did not succeed. But ours did. And it really was the genius design of the Constitution that diffused power, that celebrated liberty, and put the citizen at the center. The separation of powers, the checks and balances, the auxiliary checks that came with it. We're talking about federalism. We chose the word state on purpose. We could have chose province. We could have chose any other word. We chose the word state because we believed in that co-sovereignty. And of course, undergirding all that was the idea of an empowered citizen I mentioned. And you know what? Some historians have said that when you look at all of this, when you look at the Federalist Papers, when you look at the Constitution, when you look at the Bill of Rights, it's been argued that these are some of the most summoning words ever penned. And I agree with that. But, Madam Speaker, this was also very real. What our founders instantiated in the Bill of Rights, everything that they put there had happened to us. I mean, King George had abused the colonists. He had abused us. And we said no more. We said that we shall have liberty. And so when you look at the First Amendment, for example, the king had denied us, he denied us the ability of freedom of speech. He told us that we could not have freedom of religion. He superimposed his religious views on all the colonists. He said that we couldn't meet in groups of more than 3 because he said we'd be conspiring against him. It turns out he was actually right about that. But Madam Speaker, he denied us the right to petition our government. We put together petitions. We sent it overseas to the king, anxiously waiting on a response. King didn't even open them. He wouldn't even open these petitions. He said they have no standing. They don't have the right. Our founders said that all of our citizens have the right to petition their government. They have the right to assemble. They have the right to freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion. We hold these dear, and we're very proud of this. The Second Amendment, Madam Speaker, we often learn that the Brits marched on our guns. And that, in part, that's why the Second Amendment was put there. Well, let's remember this. Sure, it was the Brits, but that doesn't even make the point. That was our government. The Brits at the time were essentially our national government. And they marched on our guns. Founders said, no more. Free citizens who have rights and responsibilities have the right to keep and bear arms. The Third Amendment. Madam Speaker, King had quartered troops in our homes. Did that without asking. Didn't pay us any money. Our founders said that's a violation. It's a violation of the citizen. And that the only time that a government can quarter troops in a home is if Congress declares that there is a state of war and if citizens are reimbursed for that. Madam Speaker, the Fourth Amendment. The king routinely sent his troops into our homes. Didn't need cause, turned furniture upside down, could look for anything. Our founders said that would not happen again. They said that we have the right, as citizens, we have the right to be reasonably secure in ourselves, in our belongings, and that the only way the government could get access to that is if they followed a process, due process, where they stood before a judge and they showed probable cause for action. Only then shall warrants be writ. And those warrants shall have specificity in person, place, and thing, central to liberty. Madam Speaker, the Fifth through the Eighth Amendments have to do with the rights of the accused. We have the right to hear the charges against us. We have the right to not to be locked up, indefinitely detained without charge. We have the right to counsel. We have the right to not to be forced to testify against ourselves. We also won't have double jeopardy. If we're facing a capital crime, it shall first go to a grand jury. We have the right to speedy and public trials by jury. And we have the right to protection from unjust punishment. Madam Speaker, the Ninth and 10th Amendment is an affirmation of limited government, because the founders said that anything that wasn't explicitly written in the document would be left for the states or the people. Madam Speaker, this changed the history of the world. This was an incredible moment where freedom was born. And every generation since, servicemen and women have had to stand up to protect those freedoms, because we believe in the idea of the citizen, and we believe in the idea of liberty. Madam Speaker, I want to be clear. A lot of discussion in this chamber about the safety and security of our families and our communities. I want to state very clearly that all of us veterans here, we believe deeply in this. We love our families, we love our friends, we love our communities, and we want to assure their safety. That's partly what inspired us to go forward, to deploy, to fight our enemies, is to ensure the protection of our loved ones. We don't believe that by targeting with laws law-abiding citizens, we're going to be safer. We believe in background checks. Of course we do. And we don't want terrorists to get guns. In fact, we endeavored to kill or capture terrorists. We believe this. We believe that any public policy that's enacted needs to actually solve the problem, and while at the same time protecting our liberties, assuring us of the freedoms that we fought. And as we look across, what's evident is that we have issues right now with gangs and narco-traffickers. And so we support actions. In fact, we helped pass in this chamber legislation that addressed that. When we addressed the opioid issue, we addressed education, so important to cutting down on opioid abuse. We addressed treatment. We also addressed enforcement. Federalism has many virtues, but it has some challenges too. There are seams. There are seams that these narco traffickers and gangs, that they can exploit, and we helped address that. Madam Speaker, these are constructive actions that can help make us safer. We fought to defend these freedoms. We're still fighting to defend these freedoms. Madam Speaker, we're now going to hear from a series of speakers. I want to first bring up my friend from Oklahoma, Steve Russell. He represents the 5th District in Oklahoma. He served in the United States Army for 21 years. He commanded a battalion. His battalion was actually the main effort that captured Saddam Hussein back in December of 2003 in Iraq. This is an incredible person. He's a warrior. He's a scholar. He's a statesman. He was decorated with the Combat Infantryman's Badge. His servicemen and women were awarded the Valorous Unit Award, and he personally was decorated for valor. He's also a small business owner, rifle manufacturing business, and he was a representative in Oklahoma before he came here. I'm very honored to serve with him, and I recognize him now for as much time as he may consume.
And thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague and fellow warrior from New York and my brother warriors that are joining me in this effort today. And it is an honor to have a sister warrior that is also sitting in the chair with us here tonight. The right to keep and bear arms is as fundamental to our freedom as any other inalienable right we enjoy as Americans. This right is God-given, as much as the freedom of religion and to exercise worship, the freedom to assemble and express, the freedom to own property and protect our privacy. As such, serious-minded individuals must have serious deliberation on any attempt to alter these fundamental rights. In a time where Americans face uncertain threats from terrorists at home and abroad, most Americans clearly understand why we must preserve the right to defend ourselves, our families, and our property. For those who would refuse their right to defend themselves, they certainly have the freedom to do so. They do not have the freedom to make that decision for others. In terms of human behavior, our survival instincts are inherent. The Creator of the universe did not make human beings with fangs, claws, quills, or odors, poisons for their self-defense. Instead, He gave them their intelligence, and by extension, their hands to fashion implements to protect their lives. While the progressives are certainly welcome to choose not to defend themselves as their right, it is not their right to prohibit others from protecting their lives, liberty, and property, or the Bill of Rights of the Constitution of the United States. It was New Year's Eve in Blanchard, Oklahoma. 18-year-old mother Sarah McKinley, alone with her 3-month-old son, heard a ruckus at the door. 2 men were outside trying to break it down. Grabbing her baby and barricading the door with her sofa, she immediately called 911. In the frantic and desperate situation, it became clear that law enforcement would not arrive in time to prevent the assault by armed intruders with designs that can only be imagined. She informed the dispatcher that she had a shotgun and asked if it was all right to shoot the intruders if they made it inside. Wisely, the dispatcher told Sarah, "I can't tell you to do that, but you do what you have to do to protect your baby." Sarah already knew what she had to do and hoped against hope that law enforcement, while responding quickly, would arrive in time. When the armed intruders broke down the door, 24-year-old Justin Martin climbed over the couch and was greeted with a shotgun blast to the chest. While his accomplice ran for his life, Sarah had saved hers and her son's. A year ago, 88-year-old Arlene Orms was at home in Miami, Florida, when an intruder kicked in her door. Orms responded by retrieving a small .25 caliber pistol and fired at the home invader, prompting the criminal to flee. Following the incident, Orm's neighbors expressed support for her actions, with one telling the local media outlet, "You have to do something. You have to do something to protect yourself." Americans all across this land understand inherently you have the right to defend yourself, your property, your loved ones, your liberty. Progressives can no more rewrite history than they can rewrite the Constitution. From Madison, Hamilton, Jefferson, and Adams, all the way to the Supreme Court decisions with Heller and McDonald, this inalienable right has been affirmed in defense of its articulation in the Bill of Rights. While the President complains of congressional inaction on the right to keep and bear arms, we can no more take action to deny this right that we could deny a free press, a free religious exercise, or property rights of individuals. Congress cannot become a vehicle to destroy the Bill of Rights. Madam Speaker, my fellow warriors and I have nearly lost our lives like you defending this republic in our nation's armed forces doing very hard things. We stand as brothers in arms to declare that we will stand in the way of any executive who will not uphold the Constitution of the United States, plain and simple. Still, the administration and progressives press forward with passion and conviction, convincing Americans that the threat is so grievous, the injury so great, that Americans must now act. We are told that mass shootings are on the rise and gun deaths are out of control, and the worst possible environment exists among developed nations. Before America signs up to eliminate one of her inalienable rights, let's deliberate with a sober mind on this issue. The President and his party would report outrage if conservatives suggested that the First Amendment must be scrapped because of outrageous libel or hate speech. Religious bigotry and sit-ins warranted necessary common sense reforms so that we could take away the first of our enumerated freedoms embodied in the Bill of Rights. There would be outrage over such a suggestion. Americans recognize that we must face the unpleasantness of its abuses to secure its inviolable status. Not the same, some say. We are talking about outrageous loss of life and injury, and it has to stop. Since when did our security become substitute for liberty? Americans for 240 years have rather sacrificed to secure it. My brother warriors with me here, Madam Speaker, along with you and your service, we stand in that group as those who have defended and supported the Constitution since we were very young adults. What about the facts? With more than 33,000 gun homicides last year, the question is asked, don't you think it's time to do something about gun violence? Well, here's the facts. More than 60% of these homicides are suicides. While tragic, it's not the same. Only 8,124 were with firearms of the 1,961 that were murders. That's 8,124, not the 33,000 that you hear. This is a 9% decline in gun murders since 2010. Haven't heard that one. A 20% decline in gun murders since 2005. Again, you haven't heard that one. A 50% decline in gun murders since 1995. Ruh-roh, the laws seem to be working. Shall issue carry laws and good lawmaking in states, we have seen a 50% diminishment in the problem. That's called success. Why on earth would people want to change that? Here's another one that we see people asking. People are being slaughtered by these assault weapons. Don't you think it's time we ban them? Assault weapons are fully automatic and unavailable to the public. Semi-automatic rifles make up the majority of rifles owned in the United States. Here's an interesting fact. Of those 8,124 murders with firearms in 2014, the last full statistical year, only 248 were with rifles of any kind. That would be flintlocks, that would be semi-automatic rifles, that could be anything. 8,124, not the 33,000, 8,124. Of those, 248 with rifles. And yet, people think that, oh my goodness, this is the problem. This is what we have to ban. Statistically, the facts are simply not there. To put that into perspective, of other murders in different categories, 435 people were murdered in 2014 with clubs and hammers. 660 were murdered in 2014 with hands, fists, and feet. So let's have the deliberative debate, but let's look at the facts. Don't you think a terrorist, if they can't board a plane, they ought not to be able to buy a firearm? Newsflash, the terrorist watch list has over 1 million names. 99% of them are foreigners. As the only firearms manufacturer in Congress, I can assure you in 18th U.S. Code and in the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms regulations that govern manufacturers and dealers, guess what? They can't purchase a firearm, not as a non-resident alien. Ain't gonna happen. If we were to do that, we would be committing a felony. Of the less than 1% that might be eligible, an even smaller fraction of these are on separate no-fly lists. Yet you don't hear these facts. You're hearing them tonight in the people's house. All federal prohibitors would trigger an alert to the FBI on any firearms transfer, even if they were eligible. What about the gun show loophole? Don't you think businesses should be forced to conduct background checks at gun shows? I have a firearms business. If we were to go to a gun show and set up there, and we were to do a firearms transfer under that license without a NICS check and a 4473, we would be committing a felony. No firearms licensee can transfer a firearm without a background check, period. If so, felony committed with stiff penalties. On-site business, off-site transfer, doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. These are the facts. What about internet gun sales? Don't you think there should be a background check on those? Why, you can just go on the internet and they mail you a firearm. No licensee will transfer a firearm to another location without sending it to another licensee to make the transfer. When people order our products, we send them out to another federal firearms licensee. They do the background checks, they do the transfer. If that doesn't happen, nothing is transferred. To do so is to commit a felony otherwise. Further, no firearm can be transferred through the mail or a shipping service unless by a licensee, unless, the only exception, it's the owner sending it back to the manufacturer to have some repair made or something of that nature. And so these are the facts that we see and that we deal with. And as we go into this debate, we have to go into it with deliberation. We often hear, why aren't we having these issues? Why aren't we discussing this issue? Let's have the debate. Let's go after the facts. Serious people decline to trivialize any right expressly addressed in the Bill of Rights. A government that abrogates any of the Bill of Rights with or without majority approval forever acts illegitimately and loses the moral right to govern this republic. This is the uncompromising understanding reflected in the warning that America's gun owners will not go gently into the utopian woods. While liberals and gun control advocates will take such a statement as evidence of their belief in the backwater, violent, untrustworthy nature of the armed American citizen, we, gun owners, veterans, combat veterans, defenders of this republic, we understand that hope that liberals hold equally strong conviction with theirs about printing presses, internet blogs, television cameras. We get that. It's the same Bill of Rights, inalienable. The republic depends on the fervent devotion to all of our rights, not selective rights. This is the oath we take, and no president's tears or progressives' passionate pleas will shake us from the defense of the Constitution of the United States. Madam Speaker, I yield back my time to my colleague from New York.
I want to thank the gentleman from Oklahoma. I want to thank him for providing real illumination on important data and also on law. I think too often we can move off quickly without having a firm understanding of what the current law is. And so we really appreciate you bringing clarity to that subject. And also inherent in your talk, this idea, this Bill of Rights, is formed with the basis of a citizen that has rights and responsibilities. You know, we know as citizens that we have a responsibility to follow the law. And if we don't follow the law, we're held fully account for that. And that's another piece, I think, that's occasionally missing from all of this. And certainly what is missing, I believe, is the fact that all of us here tonight, and indeed, Madam Speaker, and we acknowledge, all of us acknowledge your very distinguished career in the United States military and in so many ways how you were a trailblazer and how you really are a role model for everyone, and we're so honored to serve with you. And, you know, we recognize the fact that, you know, for all of us, you know, we believe in, with every fiber in our body, that we're going to stand for these rights, and that the policy that we bring forward is going to be based on those rights and also looking to solve the problem, which, as I pointed out, when you actually look at the facts and you listen to the data, and you know that, you know, where the problems are these narco traffickers. You know, we have issues with that, and we need to take action with that. And so when we focus our policies in the area that's causing the problem, we'll actually begin to see even more safe and secure environment. By the way, also the deterrence, along with addressing the issue with narco traffickers, gangs, is the deterrent value itself of the Second Amendment. So I want to thank Mr. Russell. And at this point, I want to bring up another great American, Ryan Zinke. He's a representative from Montana, the at-large. And Congressman Zinke spent 23 years in the United States military, United States Navy, SEAL. In fact, he commanded SEAL Team 6. He was the commander of Joint Special Operations Task Force in the Arabian Peninsula, leading over 3,500 special operators in Iraq. He also established Warfare Advanced Training Command and served as the first dean of the Naval Special Warfare Graduate School. He earned 2 Bronze Stars during his service, and his service continues now. His daughter was a former U.S. Navy diver, and she is married to a Navy SEAL. Madam Speaker, I yield as much time as he may consume to my good friend, Ryan Zinke.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And when I was a commander at SEAL Team 6, I can tell you I was never the best jumper, diver, explosive expert, but I always knew who was. I was always able to surround myself with, I think, the greatest team that this country could muster. And I feel privileged and honored also in Congress to be able to surround myself with what I think are the greatest team of patriots. Both men and women have served our country and have a great love for our Constitution. Tonight's discussion is about the Constitution. And all of us took an oath to defend and support the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And this time in our government's history, I don't think there is a more of an important message to do that today. Our Constitution is about individual rights, granted by us, not by the government, but by God, secured by the people. And what we find ourselves today, not a Republican or Democrat issue. This is an American issue, and it strikes at the very heart of our country. Across our great land, there is a sense that America has lost her place. There is a sense that tomorrow is not going to be a better day, that America's greatness has passed. I don't share that thought because I believe in the people of America. But what I think has happened is this. We always thought that our president or elected officials would always have our best interest at heart. And America went busy doing the things that are required every day. Moms were dropping the kids off to school. We were working, building small businesses. Mom and pop stores were out there doing commerce. And we always thought, again, that our officials, our elected officials, would always do what's right. Well, there's a saying in the SEALs that you have to earn your trident every day. In America, we have to earn our freedoms every day. And earning our freedoms is participating in our elections, is holding our elected officials accountable, making sure that this great democracy, which is the light of the world, maintains its place. You know, John F. Kennedy, in his inaugural address, said that our great nation would pay any price and bear any burden in the defense of freedom. That sounding call was a call to all men and women worldwide, that the United States would be there in the defense of our freedoms. That was a bond that democracy and a government by the people and for the people provided the most opportunity for all of us. And at the heart of it is the defense of our individual freedoms, our freedom of speech, religion, our freedom to bear arms. They are sacred. They are sacred to Americans and the envy of the world. So tonight, as we think about what's important in our country, I ask this. It is time for America to stand. It is time for us to rally. Our country is worth fighting for. Our values are worth defending. Our nation requires all of us to act. We all rise and fall in the same tide. We all share the same experience of being American. So with that, I'm honored to be with you tonight. Thank you, and God bless.
I want to thank the gentleman. I want to thank him for really putting in focus the fact that these natural rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, these natural rights come from God, and that governments are instituted among men and women to secure those rights, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. As I mentioned earlier, what really made us different from the rest of the world, this exceptional nation, which, you know, many people thought would never work out. I want to thank you for putting that in focus. Thank you for your service to our nation. Thank you for your leadership. We're now going to hear from one of our newest members here in the House, Warren Davison, who represents the 8th District in Ohio. But he's no stranger to service. He's certainly no stranger to hard work. He graduated from the United States Military Academy in 1995, and he spent 11 years in the United States Army. He served in some of our most elite units. He served in the 75th Ranger Regiment, the 101st Airborne Division, and right here in Washington, D.C. with the Old Guard. After 11 years, having defended these freedoms, he went back home and he began to work in his family business. And then later, branched out on his own and started his own small business in manufacturing, something very important to an independent nation. We're very proud of his service. We're glad he's here with us now, and we know we see great things in his future. And at this point, Madam Speaker, I'll yield as much time as he may consume. Mr. Davidson from Ohio.
Madam Speaker, thank you. Colleagues, it's an honor to be here with you. It's a different way to support and defend the Constitution than I ever expected to have. I began my service here much like, well, everyone else. We all start the same way. We swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And that was the first time that I swore it, or any of us here tonight. In 1988, at the climax of the Cold War, I enlisted in the infantry. I was honored to serve in Germany after Ronald Reagan had uttered the famous words, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." I was honored to be there at a time when many people in the world worried that Ronald Reagan, with his intense rhetoric, would somehow cause World War III, that maybe he was pushing too far, too hard, or asking too much. But I was honored to be there when East Germans tore down their own wall. Word had gotten past the Iron Curtain and penetrated what they had been, the lies they had been told. And they knew what we had here. They tore down their own wall, and for once the oppressor did not stop them. I was honored that Thanksgiving to meet East Berliners who could not believe what they were seeing. They were seeing stores with goods on the shelves, open at night. They asked, "Is it like this everywhere?" And I thought they were talking about how big Berlin was, but they were just in shock because they had not experienced what we had. And what did we have? We had the birth of plenty. We had the world's best markets, and still do, for goods, for services, for capital, for intellectual property, for innovation. We are the world's land of opportunity, and they were hungry for it. Today, just as Ronald Reagan said much earlier in his career, in his famous speech, "A Time for Choosing," I'd encourage everyone who hasn't watched it to watch it, and everyone who hasn't watched it in a while to watch it again. Today, Reagan said, back then, famous words, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction." And sadly, that's more true today than perhaps at any time since he uttered those words then. No one knows the divide between freedom and oppression better than servicemen and women. They fight our nation's wars. They risk their lives to defend our Constitution. And sadly, the threat to our Constitution is not just from foreign enemies. Sometimes, sadly, it's right here in the halls of Congress. In my short 3 months here, I've seen attempted infringements on the First, Second, Third, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, Ninth, and 10th Amendments. That's hard to believe. Just this past summer, we had members of Congress obstructing the people's work here, staging a sit-in on the House floor to subvert our Second Amendment with a radical gun control agenda. It's an agenda that seeks to deprive us of the very rights our founding fathers sought to preserve with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Anyone could do a plain reading of the Constitution and see that the right to keep and bear arms is named right there to be applied at the individual level. The rest of the Bill of Rights is almost certainly talking about rights at the individual level, and the Second Amendment's no exception. Justice Scalia wrote in the Heller decision, "Nowhere else in the Constitution does a right attributed to the people refer to anything other than an individual right. The people refers to all members of the political community, not an unspecified subset. We start, therefore, with a strong presumption that the Second Amendment right is exercised individually and belongs to all Americans." You see, for more than 100 years, the 14th Amendment's been used to link the rest of the Bill of Rights to the states, and somehow the same folks that are on board with applying the First Amendment to states, whether it's free speech or voting rights, freedom of religion in some cases, they're reluctant to let the same be true for the Second Amendment. when they want a uniform view of things that aren't even addressed in our Constitution, like marriage. They're not willing to apply the same logic to our Constitution with something that's very plainly stated: the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I take that right very seriously. Those of us who have served in the military know all too well what a society looks like when freedoms are squashed. We've seen these places and met the people who have lived under tyranny. Our founding fathers knew the battle between freedom and tyranny too well, many sacrificing their lives in the struggle to establish this nation. It is not an accident that they enshrined that right to keep and bear arms squarely right after the right to speech and freedoms of religion. It is so essential to stave off oppressors that we cannot be truly free without it. After these men sacrificed life and limb, let us not besmirch their legacy by subjecting it to an agenda which would seek to take away this freedom, one firearm or one freedom at a time. The threats are real. It's hard to imagine. It's not just rhetoric. Those words, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction, sounds like political rhetoric, but it is just so real, and we have to take it very seriously. And it's an honor to be here and talk about it. Madam Speaker, I yield back my time.
Well, I want to thank my colleagues, and I really want to express what a privilege it is to serve in this House. I believe in this country, in this exceptional way of life. Not that we don't have warts and challenges. We certainly have those. But there's nothing that we can't solve together. And we also need to recognize that what we did in the 18th century, which allowed for the most freedom and the opportunity in the history of mankind, is not a birthright. It's not a foregone conclusion. Every generation has to defend it. They have to defend it from threats from abroad and also be vigilant for unintentional or perhaps intentional encroachment here at home. You know, our colleagues here, we believe deeply in protecting this exceptional way of life. And as I stated earlier, we love our family, we love our friends, we love our communities, and we want to ensure that they are safe. We're ready to work with our colleagues on that. And as we do, we need to keep forefront this exceptional way of life, which the first generation of Americans fought to provide for us, and that every successive generation has fought to preserve. And that we also take common sense approaches that are based on data and that are focused on actually solving the problem. We identified some of those problems tonight in areas where we think we can find some common ground, and I mentioned one of them, which we already have, in terms of the law enforcement and cracking down on the narco-traffickers. But Madam Speaker, you know, we're here tonight because we also wanted to make it very clear that while there are passions and emotions in every direction, we wanted to make it very clear that what we hold so dear, this exceptional way of life, the liberties, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, this is something we will defend. We have defended, and we continue to defend. May God bless this country. And Madam Speaker, with that, we yield back.
The gentleman kneels back.